fabulous conversation that we are going to have. All right. Happy Tuesday, Talks with E family and friends. Hey, welcome to this fabulous show, and I hope you are ready because as you can see, I know you see the beautiful ladies here before me. Last week, the ending song was Who Run the World? Girls. And here they are. I was not playing. This is not a drill. This is real life, my friends. And today, we are joined by this awesome, power packed heroes in society. And men from last week, please don't feel any type of way. I have to celebrate my women's tribe here. So today, this is part 2 of the Let's Talk Racism series. And we're so glad you're here. From wherever you're tuning in from, hey, give a drop your name. Let me know if you watched last week, what you thought about it. And as we go on with this conversation, give your feedback here. But so that I can clear the stage, I want to introduce the beautiful ladies here with me. I am Dr. E, your fabulous host of the Talks with E platform. And I know you know me, I know you, so let's make this happen. And today we will be talking about our experiences with race as women. So we're talking about 2 identities that we represent here, women and color culture. So this is going to be a hot conversation. So share this, invite somebody, and we welcome you to plug in. Lend us your thoughts, invite others to do the same, and be sure you hit that blue-green button on the right to subscribe, so that way you can connect with any of these ladies. So let me introduce you to this wonderful panel here, okay? First, we have Dr. Ivy Godana. Ivy, if you could just give a little queenly wave there.
Hello.
That's it right there. Dr. Ivy is currently a first-year general surgery resident. Yes, my people, she is a whole doctor, okay? She is based in Michigan, born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, passionate about increasing the number of Black female surgeons domestically in the US and across the globe, okay? This is Condoleezza Rice with style, with class, with culture, all the above. She completed her medical school at ATSU SOMA, undergraduates right here in Texas. So shout out to the Texas people. Majored in biology. She's a fan of number 11 and 15 Blades books, Aphorism, Wildlife Conservation, and she was recently featured in Passion and Purpose. We talk about somebody we love. Black Female Surgeons, a book on the journeys of various Black female surgeons, creating a space for themselves and others to succeed. Dr. Ivy, just wave at us one more time, because I mean, they gotta know. They gotta know. And right beside her is Claudia. Claudia, we will introduce her a little later. Today we have a little spice, a little Oreo kind of thing going here where we're going to be moderating between Claudia and I. So it's gonna be hot. This is a caramel macchiato upside down. So just be ready for this. And beside her we have Nema. Yes, Nema. This fabulous lady is currently the Global Coordinator for Legal and Risk at International Justice Mission, IJM. You know them. Ending modern day slavery. We are slashing slavery all across the board. She is passionate about using her voice to advocate for vulnerable and marginalized populations. Nema completed her undergrad at the University of Texas, Goldman Green, and she earned her Juris Doctorate from Oklahoma City University. She's a strong type 6 on the Enneagram, you gotta know. And she loves dramatic, romantic movies. Yes, we do. She is married to an accountant, and together they have 2 beautiful children, Mwendwa and Mwende. Nema, jurisprudence degree, just wave at us again. That is who she is. And let me introduce myself, as I will also be on this panel. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Bashir, or you know me as Dr. E, or maybe you know me as Talks with E. Well, this is what the E stands for, a whole Elizabeth. I'm a public health professor and program director here in Texas. I'm a social justice researcher, so this topic is near and dear to my heart. as is authentic storytelling. The research method I use is digital storytelling to give light to the first-hand experience of vulnerable populations, because it's not about my perspective, it's about putting the mic to those marginalized and vulnerable communities and asking them, hey, what is your walk like? So today, we are talking about the experiences of impact with racism, firsthand experience. You will get to know about how it's like shopping at this courier or maybe going to a coffee shop. So without further ado, let us jump into the first question. And every conversation starts with a hello. And so, hello, panelists. We are so glad you are here. And I will launch this conversation to Dr. Ivy. And Ivy, tell us about when you were first aware of your race and your cultural heritage.
Sure. So I actually moved to America when I was about 8 years old. My interpretation of what America was, or I guess my perception based on what I'd seen on the media, we had also visited before, was this diverse place where everybody gets along and everyone has the same opportunities. However, when I came here, I definitely was able to see a stark difference in the way my peers played with each other. White kids played with white kids, Black kids played with Black kids. And I remember asking my teacher about that, and she just said, well, that's just the way it is. And I will never forget that, because I think at that time, it was those were very formative years in my life. And to me, what she was essentially saying was, that's just how it is in America. White kids don't play with Black kids. So shortly after that, I had made one of my first friends, she was African American, and I remember telling her, like, well, I was explaining that, well, I'm Black, and she said, wait, no, you're not Black, you're African. And that was the first time that I noticed, like, wow, people really do keep to their own culture and their own heritage. People really don't mix. So at that age, I think it really set the stage for what my understanding was in race relations in America, that people really don't get along as much as they say they do. And there is also that double layer of being Black and being African. So that was basically the first time that I was made aware of my race and my cultural heritage of being not Black, perceived in America as not being Black because you're from Africa, when in reality, we're all Black. Since then, I've definitely been aware of it. But I think at that age, that's when it was very much like, this is how America is. This is, the race relations in America is just like that. And it kind of seems that it stayed that way as I've progressed through school. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, how we play together from the very young age, already those lines of race, and not only race, but culture, were definitely evident. Nema, what about you?
Yeah, I would say that to me, in my mind, those are two different questions. And I like the way you put it, because it's race and culture, cultural heritage. For my race, I think I've always known, I've always kind of known that I'm Black, because my dad is a pastor. So living in Kenya, which is where I was born and raised in Kibwezi, a little wonderful town, delightful. So growing up there as a pastor's child, we used to host missionaries all the time. It just so happens missionaries tend to be white. So we would host missionaries, and most of them were white, and they would come, they would do their thing, and then they would leave. But what I knew as a child, not being able to fully grasp the weight of my race, or me being Black, or them being white, I just knew that white people are the ones that come and help us. You know what I mean? Like, and I knew that we're separate. Like, we are here, and they come down to our level and they help us. I internalized that in a way that I think I'm still unraveling till this day. But yeah, so I've kind of always known that I'm Black and that I'm different from white people. I didn't really understand, like, there's many other races until much later in life. As far as my cultural heritage, I would say probably when I moved to the States, when I was around 10 years old. At that time, when I'm outside of Kenya, I think that's when I realized, oh, I have a culture. Because I feel like when you're within the majority, it just feels like a day-to-day life kind of thing. Like you understand these rules, but you don't know that other people are living and walking differently than you. So I think I understood my cultural heritage probably the first year that I was in America, which was around, like 10 years old, because of similar experiences as Ivy is describing. I was very much told in very many ways and in different spheres of my life that I'm not Black or I'm not African because I'm not in Africa. I'm not Black because I wasn't born here. So there's so many like little nuances to who I am that people would speak into. So I realized that there's a cultural kind of division and understanding that I needed to get deeper. So, but that started when I left Kenya to come to the States.
Wow. And I think for me, before I go to Claudia, I'll also answer this one. And I have a unique experience as well, because now not only is there race, culture, there's also religion, right? So growing up in Kenya, I was a Kenyan, Kikuyu, but I was also belonged to a religious organization or a religious group that was very already marginalized and ostracized. So even in Kenya, that whole social positioning for myself as a Mokorino girl was very felt. So grew up realizing that I was different, right? Was different, but in Kenya in regards to religious affiliation, right? And then when I moved to the US with my family, then I now got a triple of not only African, an immigrant, not only Black, but then even within the Kenyan community or my cultural community, this idea of now my religious affiliation is still othered, right? So all along I have experienced, maybe would not have been able to say what it is, but now I understand it's that positioning of, oh, the Yakurino people are different, they're weird, they're not this, and then coming to the US, and now not only is my skin color an identity that puts me on a lower totem scale, but so is my cultural affiliation and speaking with an accent, right? That was when I realized, oh, wow, there are different people. Because let me tell you, hearing that Texan accent for the first time, you shook it. You're like, wait, what did you say? And you have to think, you have to focus really carefully. Right. And then to realize they don't understand me, but we're speaking the same language, right? So it was that idea. We are speaking English, but we are not on the same spectrum at all. And we don't look alike, we don't think alike, and we don't speak alike. So that was my first awareness of race, like true difference, Black, white, when I crossed the seas and came to the US. But in terms of cultural heritage, culture is also very religious based as well. I knew that when I was in Kenya, but now it's a triple whammy now here in the US. So I love what you're saying on that one. And Claudia, let us hear from you, because you're on the other eastern side of the world. When were you first aware of your race and your cultural heritage?
Well, first off, ladies, thank you so much for having me and welcome. I love how inspiring the first 5 minutes are already, and I'm learning so much. So for me, it has been a similar kind of like coming to America story as it has been for you guys, and yet a bit different. I come from a very small town in Austria, bordered to Hungary and Slovenia, about 3,000 people, grew up in a very white, which I did not know the perception of white when I was in Austria until I came to America, actually. Farmland, and at the age of 18, I decided I need to learn English. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna go to America. So I went to the US at the age of 18. I worked what was then called an au pair, a nanny. I took care of 4 kids in a very diverse community outside of San Francisco, a little town called
Pleasanton. And at night, I took classes of English as a second language at the University of Berkeley. So back then when I came to the US, my English was very British English because this is the way we're taught in school, right? So I had this notion of coming to these classes and for the first time, actually experiencing cultural diversity. But it was very different, and racial diversity, but it was very different from the way I had perceived the US. For me, the reason coming to the United States was I knew it was a country where dreams are possible. I knew it was the personification of a society, people, and culture where if you hustle, and I did not really fully understand the word hustle back then, you're able to accomplish everything in life. Until I started to talk to an African American fellow in school or at university. And for the first time, there was all of a sudden a notion and a concept of Black and white. There was Black excellence that was being talked about. Black excellence, something I've never heard before, not because I've never were exposed to Black people, or Black people weren't part of the diverse life in Austria here, but just because there was a very strict notion of the excellence of the Black and how the rest of the world is. And the second thing for me was, which was really interesting, talking about the cultural heritage, is I come from a very cultural colorblind society. And if I say colorblind, I really mean it. And I don't only mean it in a positive aspect, is when you go somewhere, you aren't necessarily need to be perceived as the Austrian, right? When you come to America, most people will think anyways, you're Australian, which is absolutely fine. And if they don't, then they think you're European. Europe is one country in and of itself, which is totally okay as well. But all of a sudden, when I came to America, and in particular, taking these classes and being exposed to Americans for the first time, I was perceived as just the white girl from America, and no one saw me as the Austrian I actually was. So I was, for myself, and I'm not talking about race, but I'm more talking about my cultural identity, struggling with the fact that I had, to a certain extent, and maybe this has been similar for you ladies as well, give up my cultural heritage and identity in order to be able to fit in. Because all of a sudden I was the white girl in America. And I was, by the time I spoke English a little bit better and I kind of accustomed to the slangs and to the dialects and whatnot, I became more American than I was Austrian. Now, I don't know if that makes a lot of sense or is kind of integral for this panel, but when you all were talking about how your identity was lost a little bit coming to America, I felt it was similar for me, but coming from a very different perspective. So that was the first time I was aware that there is a difference. I do not, and probably never will, if I don't start fully educating myself around or participate or learn from each and every one of you, understand what this difference of systematic and systemic racism is. Something I'm never going to be able to experience, but something I need to learn for the sake of myself, for the sake of my son, and for the sake of society.
Thank you for that, Claudia. And I love what she said is that you will never, experience it, but you want to learn, right? And that's why these conversations are so important, to where we get the chance to talk about that firsthand experience, so that way you can see the other side of the story as well. So let me ask this question to Nema here. Nema, describe a scenario in your life where you experienced also racism firsthand and how you handled it.
Yeah, that's a very good question, especially, and these conversations are really good, just given the light of what's going on in our society. So I have very many experiences, unfortunately, with racism and discriminatory acts and things like that unfortunately a lot of Black people do in this world and in this country. So out of all those, I think I'll pick one. And yeah, so there was a particular time, and this one always sticks out because we are in a conversation about police brutality and especially targeted towards Black people. So there was a time I lived really close to my high school. I lived literally walking distance. It took me, across the street was our high school football field. So I would walk every single day to school. And my whole high school career, that's what I did with my brothers and everything else. So at one particular day, I was walking to school and a police officer pulled up right next to me as I'm walking and just minding my own teenage business. And the police officer asked me what I was doing. And I had a backpack and I was wearing like school clothes. I don't know what those are, but I was walking to school clearly, but he asked me where I was going and what I was doing. And I remember I told him that I'm going to school. And then he asked me, what school do you go to? And I told him I go to Highland Park High School. And then he looked at me and he said, so you go to Highland Park High School? And I said, yes, I go to Highland Park. So then he said, okay. And then as I was walking, I turned around and I saw that he was still trailing me, like driving very, very slowly and looking at me and making sure, I guess, that I was going to school. I'm not even quite sure what it was. And up until I actually walked in the door of the school. And I give that story because in that moment, I didn't actually understand what was going on. I didn't actually identify it as racial profiling or anything else. But right now, as I stand here, and also maybe a few months later, or maybe a couple years later, the light just went off in my head that, first of all, we were the third Black family to own a house in Highland Park. I was the only Black student at that time at my school, me and my brothers. And this cop decided to pull over next to me with a backpack and ask me where I'm going, as if it's not assumed that I'm going to school when other kids are walking to school. You know what I mean? The way I reacted, the way I handled it is probably not the way I would handle it now. I think right now I would make a little bit more noise, but at that time, being the only Black child in a school, there's a lot of excuses like, oh, maybe he just didn't know, I didn't want to rock the boat, so I didn't ask any questions. I didn't, pursue it any further. But I wish now I can go back and actually ask him a few more questions. Like, why are you stopping me? Why is it that you saw a child with a backpack and then you decide to trail them as if they're gonna go do something wrong, or you know what I mean? But it did affect how I viewed myself. I viewed myself as a threat, maybe, and it did affect how I even interacted with people. And there is another, cops have been called on us many times living in that community. And there was another incident where actually Ivy and I and a few other friends were hanging out at our house. And we were playing outside and somebody called the cops on us. And I think about 4 cop cars showed up and they asked us if we lived there. And we told them this is our parents' house. And it seemed like they didn't believe us. My dad had to be called to prove that he actually owns the house. So situations like that, those are the more dramatic things, but the more pervasive drips of water are the people following you in the grocery store or shopping or being asked, why is your name like that? Why? Whenever I describe or whenever I say my name is pronounced Nema, I'm corrected and I'm told, no, it's actually Nima. Your name is pronounced Nima. And I'm like, but I'm telling you what my name is, so things like that. So those ones are the more dramatic ones, but there's the day-to-day, just occurrences that are very unfortunate.
Yes. Ivy, what about you?
It's actually kind of similar to what Nema, I wouldn't say in the exact scenario, but it's a small drip that you begin to, understand much later as you get older. Well, that was actually racial profiling, or that was discrimination. For me, it was sort of in that same time period that I mentioned before when we had just come to America. I was getting used to understanding racial relations here. And I remember I had made friends with 2 girls, and one of them was white and the other one was Hispanic. And the white girl, after a couple of days of playing together and, getting to know one another, it was the next day she came back and she was like, my mom said I can't be friends with you anymore. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what did I do? And I thought about it in my mind. I'm like, is it that is it the way I dress? And then eventually it came to, maybe it's because you're Black, you know? That was the very first time that I had experience with understanding what discrimination was. And it was sort of also in that same time period, I had a elementary school teacher who was very dismissive of me and my family. My mom was really trying to understand like how the school system works. You know, we do the grading system where your children are numbered according to their performance. And seeing the way she spoke to myself and my mom, and how she had such low expectations of my performance as a student, really made me feel less than. It made me feel very insignificant, or sort of like you don't matter. And even it kind of set that tone academically, and I had to shave that off as I, went up in school. But that was probably the very first time that I realized, oh, being Black in America is not just being Black, it's actually being seen as less than, or being seen as an undesired friend, or being seen as an underperforming student. So that was my very first encounter with them.
Okay, wow. And I'll share mine before I turn the question to Claudia, and then Claudia, you'll take over with the next discussion point. For me, it resonates on both ends. And one of the first experiences I remember is we just come to the country, and we had enrolled in school, and I started school here at 7th grade. So I was a little bit above in terms of the education that technically for my age should have been in 5th grade or so. But I remember particularly in math, which I'm very good at even to this day, the teacher would take a quiz, and the grades would be given. She'd be like, wow, Elizabeth, I'm very surprised with this. Did you know the answers ahead of time? I'm like, no, bro, it makes sense. It's negative plus. Those things made sense to me, right? And she would try to shock me to answer a question in person on the board. I used to always be called to show how I did the math, because I could do it in my head, right? I knew multiplication, all these things, but she was very focused on, but show me how you got there. And I'm like, okay, I will, right? And so I used to do all these things to prove I'm not cheating. My daddy would kill me if he found out I was cheating. But It was then I finally started realizing why she always calling on me and not other people. And then the narrative with my friends was, I'm very surprised you're smart, right? And just like Ivy mentioned, is this shock that I actually am smart, I mean, I am, but but it's to having to prove that, no, really, I actually really do get it. I did do this work myself. So I realized it is already being taught. I have to do more. I have to deliver a little harder. I have to be more eloquent. I have to be more perfect, not make mistakes, because even one comma, I mean, it's like I plagiarize the whole thing. So that was the narrative, and I was taught to do more, to now over expound on my work, over expound on my explanation, because if I got to 50 divided by 2 to 25 real quickly, it was assumed I was cheating, right? And that informed even how I wrote my English papers. I would just be dividing and proving myself. So the narrative that I understood of a Black student is, you're not expected to be smart. You have to work just as hard to show that you deserve to be in the top 10 percentile, because people always look for ideas or explanations as to why you are the way you are. It's not that you are smart. There's no way. You just can't. So it's learned. And even that played out even in college, right? Until I finally say, you know what, guys, I'm not going to explain to you how I understand this. I'm a quick learner. Get it, get over it, let's move on. But I had 10 years worth of working so hard to do extra when it was not needed. Claudia, you represent the Austrian, you represent the European aspect, and from a visibly a point of view, a white woman, right? But you are still a woman right along with us. Describe a place where you experienced or saw racism firsthand and how you handled it.
So a couple of years ago, I worked for an international organization called the United Nations. And even though it is a very diverse blanket of cultures and ethnicities and languages, we still were, to a certain extent, there wasn't the unity that I was hoping that it would be. So I actually had a Kenyan coworker who was working with me at the UN in Washington D.C. for a very specific project to mitigate climate change through food loss and food waste. And we were running into a meeting. So the thing we were supposed to do is to negotiate loans and fundings from the U.S. government, USDA, Department of State, and so forth, and then have these loans trickle down to the emerging economies we worked for. So when we walked into a meeting, I felt really bad for her because she was more American than I'm going to ever be. She was born and raised in America, went to Georgetown University, Harvard Law, did a degree. She did everything, like Elizabeth was saying, she was supposed to do to be at the top. We're sitting down at the table, and the folks from the US government, of course, greeted both of us, but they gave me the floor to start, even though she actually was 1 or 2 levels above me. So that was the first time that, from a woman's perspective, where afterwards I told her, I said, gosh, I'm so sorry. I've never experienced that. I felt very uncomfortable being in the room. How was it for you? Like, do you want to grab a coffee? Do you want to talk about it before we're going to head back to the office? And he just brushed it off as something that was very common. And to me, that was very telling that it's something that you're just being used to, and it's something that you just take on for what it is. And I, not from a white perspective, not from an Austrian perspective, not from a European perspective, but from a, hey, this is my sister, because I work with her and we've worked day and night and I love her and she's amazing. We've been to parties together and, have shared more than just the work objective when it comes to that. To see her react in such a way just made me think about what this American belief of racial system would look like. I don't know if this answers your question, Elizabeth, but I can just speak from the reverse end. And again, going back to what I initially said, being from Europe and having a very, I think, different understanding of race, and because I do believe in Europe, countries are just so close to each other that we don't differentiate between the Hungarian, the Italian, the Spaniard, right? It's the European Union. We're all one. It's the blanket of diversity. I thought that coming to America, it was kind of similar. Realizing that, yes, there is diversity. Everyone is the same, but the little nuances to that in the everyday life. So that's the way I experienced it.
Wow. Okay. And last question before I turn over the floor to Claudia. For each of you, Nema and Ivy, in 30 seconds, right? What would you tell some of your Caucasian friends or even friends from a different race about how they can be more aware of their own privilege and see and call out racism when it happens? What would you say to those individuals? I'll start with Ivy.
Sure. I would definitely say that being educated and being aware of privilege is important. I think it kind of sets you up for seeing the reality of how someone else may experience a situation. And number 2, don't be afraid to speak up. You will only help everyone around you. We talk about how we want the society to change. Well, it starts at the individual level. If you see something unfair, address it right then and there. Simple.
Okay. Awesome. Nema?
Yeah, I would say that the way they can become more aware of their privilege is by having these kinds of conversations that you have, you are demonstrating to all of us. By speaking to your Black brothers and sisters, that whether they're at work or your church, and experiencing and seeing their experience, like Claudia, what you saw with your friend, you can see that you had a privilege of just being in white skin, and therefore you're looked at as being in a higher level, right? So that in turn should cause you to act and to actually speak up and say in public, this person is actually senior to me, right? So like calling that out in public or in private, like if those things are happening privately, but if they're happening publicly, calling it out and defending your friend or standing up for your friend, that's the only way to resolve it. And that's the only way to handle privilege.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Claudia, over to you.
Thank you. And Nema, Thank you so much for this last thing. I think you're absolutely right. It's the kind of when you see something, you say something approach, and that you tend to learn as those situations kind of just accumulate, which unfortunately they're the case. So, Elizabeth, do you want to share quickly though what you would tell your Caucasian friend? What would you tell me on how I can become more aware of my privilege?
Yes. So piggybacking of what Ivy and Emma said, it's that I realized that my experiences, even though they're not unique to me, my reaction and the impact they have is unique to me. And my responsibility, even in that space, is to have those conversations and say, hey, this really hurts, right? So even on my end, being responsible socially and letting my Caucasian friends or friends that have privilege to point that out and let them know, did you notice XYZ, right? And then having a conversation with them, because they may, whether the argument as to whether they know or they don't know, that's another conversation. But assuming they don't know, and for the sake of my heart in loving all people and thinking all people are good, that's how I approach it. And so that maybe they don't know, so I use it as a time to educate, and not really just for me. As a social justice advocate, I rise up to speak for other people. So I may be challenging the narrative for my Black sisters and brothers, but it's because I see their demise that I say I have to speak up. And so I just shine the light and say, hey, this experience right here, how this happened, this is the impact, whether you realize or not, it had on me and people that look and associate with me. So it's educating and challenging them, because once you dismantle ignorance, the rest is accountability and hoping they will rise to the challenge. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Like you were saying, right? The system is broken and we need to fix the system as it is. Well, ladies, you all are just fantastic and so strong and amazing in how you share your story. So normally, but also on how we give each woman from each race right now the opportunity to have a voice at the table and to learn from one another. So for those of you, Elizabeth quickly said it, my name is Claudia Krobler. I am an Austrian who currently resides in Austria, but I'm actually based in Washington, D.C. Love what Talk with E is all about. So I'm really grateful to be here to learn from each and every one of you, but also from a global storytelling perspective. I am really interested in on how we can take these stories of our shared humanity right now and how can we bridge them from a digital storytelling perspective forward for generations to come. These has two reasons. One is I'm a documentary filmmaker and I'm really interested in how we can pack these things and potentially also put them in a digital storytelling version. And the second thing is I am the mother of a multiracial, multicultural 7-month-old son. So I do see it as a white European, but as also a mother, my responsibility to help him understand what this history looks like, which he's going to learn about, right? In 10 to 15 years, he is going to talk about police brutality, about George Floyd. He's going to understand what American heritage looks like, the same way what the struggles of the Austrian history and heritage were as well. So to kind of dive into the next questions on impact on solutions, if you ladies don't mind, I would like to read out a quick excerpt of a article and a poet, a Nigerian American poet, Ben Okri, wrote in the Financial Times on June 12th. And I thought it was very powerful and just really struck to me, and I definitely would love to have your thoughts on that. And he said, racism does not reflect reality. It only reflects the reality of power relations. If the Western economy were to collapse today and all financial and military power more eastwards, the mythology of race would have moved eastwards too. Mythology is often the storytelling of those who have gained power. Strip people of their power and the justification of their racism vanishes. Watch a people acquire power and the justification of their race emerges. Racism is destructive. Racism is really war declared. It is war threatened at every moment. If you remove all the social niceties, this is what racism says, and listen very closely. Your life means nothing to me. My life is more important than yours. A logical conclusion of racism is genocide. So with the next question I'm going to ask you, I would first of like to understand, and I'll start off with you, Avery. What do you think about this? If you agree, yes or no? And also you can talk a little bit about and describe a scenario where your race impacted you from an institutional organizational level. And that goes back to the comment I made about the experience I had with my coworker. So when has that happened? And how does this excerpt resonate with you?
I think the part where you said that until that the storytelling really does lie within whoever's in power. And that reminds me of I'm not sure if it's East African or if it's specific to Somalia, but there's a saying that says, until the lion learns to speak, the tales of hunting will always be weak. Meaning the lion is never going to tell you, well, I've evaded him multiple times. And the hunter will say, I got him that one time. But I think that speaks a lot about perspective, a lot about how one person sees the world, about how someone else's perception of the same thing may be very different. So I very much do agree with that statement. And then to answer your second question, my personal experience with I guess, racism or understanding race and culture on an organizational level. I just did a talk on this with the Association of Women Surgeons, specifically for me within the context of medicine. Race is an ever continuing discussion, because we see it both in the patient to doctor relationship. We see it amongst physicians. We see it with how we train our residents. But for me, my personal experience as a trainee, I do see a difference between sometimes the way physicians treat patients of color. And there are multiple papers about this, not understanding that people experience pain. Pain is very subjective. Someone being Black or being African or an immigrant does not mean that they somehow have a higher pain threshold. So standard of care should always be held the same for everybody. Another thing is, another point is that, the way that we, besides caregiving, how we speak to our patients, right? You can't just talk to a patient like using all this medical jargon. You have to kind of meet them where they are. And sometimes I do see a bit of a difference between how we choose to meet patients who are of maybe the Caucasian race versus patients who are of the African American race. And those things, when you as a trainee witness someone who's training you do that, that also becomes formed into your own practice. And that is a very, very, very dangerous thing, because it's a continuation of the same problem. That means the next generation of physicians will continue to do the same thing. So that's one part of it. Another part of it, honestly, like myself being a Black physician, I'm the only Black resident in my hospital. And sometimes I do see that patients will assume that I'm not their physician. So even though I'm wearing a white coat, I have a stethoscope, and I tell you what your plan is for the day, people will still be like, oh, like, are you with physical therapy? I think probably the funniest comment I've gotten when I walked into a patient's room is, did you bring a menu? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's just, I think people assume one another too much. And that's an aspect in the doctor-patient relationship in which sometimes patients may not see, physicians as, you may not necessarily, say, oh, my physician is Black. People are very, very, you have to sort of prove it to them, like, this is my badge, this is my picture of my badge, this is me in the white coat, and I'm your physician for the day. So I guess those would kind of be probably the things that have impacted me the most at my training level, I guess, in my occupational level.
Well, Ivy, thank you so much. Like, this is authentic storytelling right at its best, right? I'm sure the other panelists, but also the audience, would be also interested in understanding, how do you think has this doctor-patient relationship and or the care that has been given to the Black community changed during COVID-19 as well? Could you experience that firsthand?
Yeah, so I'll just start off way at the top, like what we know based on news, what's been published already in clinical journals and in research, is that it actually has affected the African American population way more. And I don't think that it's necessarily that the virus is able to discriminate, oh, this is an African American patient versus, a white patient or a Hispanic patient. But a lot of it has to do in the breakdown in how people receive care. if someone says, I can't breathe, I'm having a hard time breathing, and they're African American, there has actually been shown that patients are, I guess, care providers are less likely to heed to that, to, really take that as being an alarm, where people just assume that they're exaggerating. So that's one aspect of it. But actually, even before that is access to care,
Right.
People may not feel trusting of their hospital to go there and to receive quality care. So they may stay home. A lot of patients who died from COVID-19, African Americans, some of them actually died at home in New York in their homes, and that's alarming. That means there's not a trust in the healthcare system. I don't necessarily know if COVID has changed that, because we've seen a lot of illnesses affect the African American population way more. But I do think in what's happening now, as far as like what we're addressing with police brutality and race in America, that has to change. A lot of Black physicians are becoming a lot more vocal. They're becoming a lot more clear about, hey, there are a lot of other things that are wrong in healthcare that have to do with race, and we have to change that now. This is the time to change it.
Thank you, Ivy. So you're saying we have to change racism on every level where we're going to see it, right?
Exactly.
And it starts with healthcare and with police brutality. Thank you so much. Naima, over to you. How would you, or what, describe a scenario where race impacted you at an institutional organizational level, and how has this quote resonated with you?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that as Ivy was answering, and because of going to law school, I feel like I have been trained to answer everything in an it depends. So you have to forgive me about that. I just come from that angle, but I will say that the unfortunate thing about racism and discrimination is that it's kind of invisible, until the actual effect of somebody calling you the N-word or basically killing you, right? Everything has to be assumed in what you're not saying or what you are saying, or I didn't get this job. Maybe it's because of my name. Maybe it's because of my skin color. So like, it's kind of invisible and it's always there. And that is the most unfortunate thing. And the way I'll answer, just working in different corporate spaces. So I have two answers. The big answer is just looking at executive level or board levels, or whoever you're working for. Senior management typically is white, and usually in America, a lot of companies define diversity as women or as somebody who is white, but maybe from Switzerland, right? Then we're diverse, right? We have an English person on our board, or we have a woman on our board, but you have no Black person. And so that is one way that it's very clear in organizational or institutional levels. But I will say that I am 100% sure that there is a lot of things that have happened to me as a Black woman, as an immigrant, that I just don't know. And that is the issue with systemic racism and discriminatory practices that we're trying to end now, is that I can't actually pinpoint the thing that happened because I can't really prove it. But I know I didn't get that job because either I'm Black, or because you didn't look at my resume because of my name, or because I was pregnant, right? Like, there are so many little issues, but you're gonna tell me that you found a better candidate who's a better cultural fit, right? So, so it's just a very difficult question to answer, but I think the main obvious one in looking at organizations and institutions is looking at their staff, but also senior management. How does that look like? Do you have Black people? Do you have Indigenous people? Do you have people of color that are not white, right? And a lot of companies are now starting to have these conversations, which is wonderful, but you can't actually move from status quo until you resolve that, until you, first of all, give up ownership of the table, because saying something like, oh, we invite you to the table as a Black person. I saw this on social media that somebody was writing, that it insinuates that you own the table and you're just giving me a little piece of it, right? So it's not about you inviting me to your table or you giving me a seat at the table. It's about how do we dismantle that table, build a table together that we can now move forward, right? So like it's a lot of invisible heart, but also mental and also systemic issues that affect our day-to-day lives as Black people, as Black women, as immigrants, that it's just hard to pinpoint this is the one thing that happened to me. Many things have happened, but I am sure if I was a white man, I would be further, but I have no proof of that, right? So it's just a hard question to answer. And I don't know if that's my legal hat or not.
No, it makes, it was actually beautifully explained, right? It is about how do we dismantle the table and how do we put it back together and give everyone the same equal opportunities. Dr. E, what is your take? What is your experience been?
Yes, again, piggybacking the women, these women are all explaining experiences that I have also experienced, so I will not belabor the point there. But I love what Nema said about it's invincible and it's difficult to prove. It's just difficult to prove. And that also makes it very difficult for you because you until you have proof, then nothing can be done about it. And then you end up getting this narrative of a mad Black woman. You're always angry. You're always on this talk about equity, about fairness. Who has mistreated you? Oh, where is your plight? And I'm like, it's there. It's just written in my experiences and in my body, in my skin, in my everyday. But it's difficult until you literally walk in my skin to see it, right? And that's why these conversations to point out those nuances are so important, because when you look at the literature, it's not the overt racism, not the overt, obvious, in your face things that are killing us and raping us of our future, allow me to use that word. It's the covert, passive aggressive, if you didn't notice it, or if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't catch it. But for somebody that has been catching it for 30 plus years, you notice it. So it comes out in that who has the seat, who owns the table, right? Who decides the decision? And I love that analogy of look at the decision makers. If there is nobody like me in that table, then you will not be able to make decisions that are for me, right? If there is no Black man at that table or that Aboriginal patient at that table, there's no way humanly possible you will be able to make a decision for me, because you don't know what is needed, what I need, because you haven't walked my shoes, you haven't experienced my battles. So until you walk in my shoes, you cannot come up with a policy or standards that protect me. And so it's challenging and saying that within these constructs of social norms, we become marginalized because we're not given not only space at the table, we're not even given a seat in the background at all. Right. And when we do show up, so we will be hearing, this is how it happens for me. We have a speaker coming to talk to us about public health, and she has quite an extensive resume, and people are looking around, and I'm there. I'm dressed the part in my heels. I look hot, but nobody is looking my way. It's not until I stand up, and everybody's like, okay, why is she standing up? I'm like, hey guys, my name is Dr. E. It was like, oh, even the teacher starts apologizing because they didn't think. They've invited me. We've conversed on LinkedIn, on email. So we've never traded photos or anything. And they're seeing me for the first time as me, right? So the Dr. E that they expected, they did not expect Elizabeth. Maybe the Cher would have given them a hint, but I go by Dr. E. So, or I use Elizabeth, right? They weren't expecting me, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. If I've known it was you, I would have talked to you at the elevator. I'm like, oh, It's okay. So it goes back to in middle school, having to prove myself, my worth, right? My intellect, having to quote my resume and everything that I've done over and over and over, at meetings. Who are you again? Well, hey, I'm, with such and such. So it happens in that. And when you call it out, it may be like, oh no, they probably forgot, or they maybe they weren't aware. And I'm like, no, they were. I just didn't fit the molds. And they cannot wrap their head around this is Elizabeth Bashera, and the resume and the physical attributes do not match. So that's how it comes off. And it's very invisible. It's very, somebody can say, oh no, they just forgot, or oh, they can't pronounce that name. No, but if I was to give you $1 million, you would really know my first, middle, and last name very well, because now I am of worth to you. So that's how, for me, I have seen it, experienced it, and navigate.
Wow, thank you. This is powerful, and all of you ladies are disrupting the system in one way or another. And I think just listening to all of you, it did make me aware of something I have to remind myself a lot more often, is this white privilege, right? So we talked about the impact it has. We talked about how you experience this on a daily basis in your jobs and your everyday life. Let's talk about a little bit the solutions right now and what some of the solutions could be. And let's really go to the US and to the fact that we all are immigrants living in a country that really prides itself of being built on immigrants, that prides itself of its cultural heritage. And now we have culture, race, ethnicity, everything coming to a bottleneck, into an explosion through the police brutality, racism, and everything that's and COVID-19 as well, like Ivy, as you pointed out before too. Everything coming to the bottleneck and like a volcano rising up, but we need to come to a certain sense of unity in any way, right? Or in any shape or form or any time. So from your perspective, and Nima, I will start off with you. When do you think this point of unity is going to come? I know we cannot put a date stamp on it, right? It's not possible. It's action driven. When do you think it's going to come, and what do we need to do to get there?
To be completely honest, and this might sound really hopeless, I actually don't know when it will come, or if it will come. I think there's so many issues that we're facing, and especially as African Black women, if I can just speak from that perspective, there is a battle that we're facing in America, being American, like Black American, walking this life. But then there is struggles that we come from in back home that are rooted in colonialism, right? So there are a lot of strengths that lead back to white supremacy, ultimately, that we kind of have to decipher. And that's just us. So there's a lot of different communities. There's the Asian American community that have their own stuff that they have to work through. But I will say, what I do know is there is no moving forward until repentance has happened. So to have repentance, you have to have acceptance of wrongdoing by the wrongdoer, correct? So there is no way that I can move forward, or, okay, there is a way. So I'm a Christian. Let's back up. I'm a Christian. So I can forgive, and I do try, like my husband, I try all the time to forgive him without him asking for forgiveness. It's very, very difficult. And ultimately, I sometimes have to ask him, you have to say sorry for the thing that we can move forward with having the conversation. So the best place to meet is by the person who has the power or who has wielded the power wrongly in a way that harms, to actually acknowledge, you know what, this was wrong. I might have done it for so many years, and I might still be doing it right now with the systems, but there's no way to move forward until I actually just tell you, I'm sorry, and I want to stop. I want to stop hurting you. and I want to fix this. I know right now it's messed up. The systems are messed up, from education to food to even jobs, to every single aspect of life as a Black person is hard. And that is at the systemic level. So that will not happen with the snap of the fingers just because we put a hashtag together and we're trending for 2 months. That's not going to happen. So what needs to happen is white people need to have these conversations of actually repenting, of actually owning their privilege and saying, you know what, I didn't even know that I was using my privilege for this, and I didn't know that it was working for my benefit and for your harm. So how do we fix this now? I'm sorry, right? And I think only at that point can actual reconciliation happen, and only at a catalytic moment, like right now. So I'll digress a little bit. I have a group at my work that we are reading, or we were reading Roadmap to Reconciliation by Dr. Brenda McNeil. It is a wonderful, wonderful book. I would recommend it to anybody. And she talks about how there's no change that can happen until a catalytic moment occurs. And I do believe that this might be America's catalytic moment. This might be the time where we decide we're going to turn from everything that we were doing, from whatever it is, police brutality. We're going to look at that system and we're going to figure out how to fix policing in America. But if we don't acknowledge that, the moment is going to pass us, and we're going to actually get deeper into these deeply rooted, rotten systems. So I am hopeful that when Jesus comes, we will be in a better place. But ultimately, I do think the only concrete answer I can give is we have to have conversations like these, and there has to be some act of repentance from oppressors.
Thank you, Naima. And I'm sorry. So I will start apologizing for probably the white privilege that I have not seen myself. So let's move forward in the interest of time. And I have been on this chat with Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for pointing this out. Maybe then we can move over to the next question with that is, and Ivy, I will give it over to you and to Elizabeth as well, is so what can global citizens, and we spoke a little bit about the perception of not only diversity, but global and cultural identity, global citizens that all of us are, right? Do to really raise awareness towards racism, and how can we use storytelling, such as talk sessions like this right here, as a really effective tool to ignite peaceful conversations and solutions to this bottleneck into the volcano that's going to arise and just bottle up for just the unforeseeable future. So Ivy, what do you think? What is your take? And then I will hand over to Dr. E.
So pretty much, I feel like that kind of answered the question. Having conversations like this, just like Naima said, it is really the beginning of understanding why are we here? Where are we, first of all, and how are we going to move forward? And I believe you asked like the global understanding of.
So what can global citizens do to raise awareness towards this issue? And really from a global perspective, Kamalin, right? Because you spoke a lot about the local as well.
Yes. Number one, knowledge is power. If you do not know what is going on globally, there is no way you can dismantle a system and recreate something better. So you have to know why, like I mentioned, why are those systems there? What were they trying to hide? What were they trying to inhibit? Where are a lot of these countries, you know? And I think just to touch a little bit on like the political situations globally, a lot of the countries in Africa that were colonized by, whether it's the British, the German, the Dutch, we say that we're free, we're liberated, but there's still a lot of chains there. There's still a lot of economic dependence. You know, things like recognizing we are a continent that is full of all the world's natural resources. How are we still asking for aid? You know, those are problems that are embedded in the way the global economy is set up, the way the political institutions have been created. But when we understand that, that's when we'll actually begin to move forward. Hi, so cute.
Sorry, ladies, we have someone who wanted to join the conversation.
Welcome.
That is absolutely okay.
Start them young.
Yes.
But yeah, in essence, just to, back to just trying to encapsulate the whole point is that when you understand what is going on, then you'll be able to adjust the problem. Then you can create a better solution. So that's my response to that.
Dr. E, what do you think? So it's really about dismantling not only the table, but also the problem, and doing sessions like these, right? Where that's why I love your show. We're really going to be able to show kids like him and Nima's kids as well, is how are we going to be able to create a new tomorrow and a new setting of cultural understanding.
Yes, absolutely. And I love what Ivy said, and also even Nema did a really good segue there too. It's realizing that this is not just a singular thing, right? Systematic racism means that if you look at it, whether it is in China, whether it is in wherever, it's happening. The same vehicle that is causing this is the same vehicle. It may look a little different. It may, be a Chevy instead of a, oh my goodness, instead of a Tesla, or a Range Rover instead of a Benz, but it's a vehicle, right? And this vehicle is driven, it's first created by people, and then it's driven by people. And so understanding that it's all a domino effect, right? We have to look at history, colonialism in the African setting. We look at slavery now in the Americas and other places. It's all interconnected with this idea of white supremacy, or the idea that one race is better than another. And that is oppression. And the worst form of oppression is marginalization, which is you have this center where the powers that be inform the rules of the land, they inform what is normal, what is acceptable, and everybody that deviates from, whether it is being white, whether it is being a certain gender or a certain religion, is pushed to the margins. And that pushing to the margins is what now we see: the police brutality, the high rates of Black mothers, delivering, dying from childbirth, whether it is having a judicial system where the pipeline from the ghettos to the jailhouses is like a direct line. So asking yourself, why do we have this? Why do we have that? Is once we have that global mindset, and we are global, we represent 2 continents, each of us in our own respective ways. The future generation will make the world even more smaller. So we cannot look at it from just a lens, a micro lens of just in the Americas. We have to call out. And I love what Nema said, calling out wrong as wrong, right? And saying, hey, slavery is wrong. Colonialism and the vehicles that happen are wrong. And regardless of who taught you how to chew with your mouth open, or who taught you that burping is acceptable, whatever you were taught, we now need to all sit in the same dining table and say, that's rude, that's mean, that's wrong, that does not help all of us. So how can we coexist together to where if the burpers have to continue burping, then get your own burping room, but don't inflict us and cause us even more harm because of your beliefs and your lifestyles. So it's respecting people, right? And to wrap up this session is that to have conversations and allow ourselves to say, change may take a minute, but it has to happen, because the cost of not doing anything is too high. The cost of my father being shot by a police is too high a cost. The cost of a Black woman dying when delivering is too high a cost. The cost of a Muslim girl being raped because her only worth in life is to produce children is too high of a cost, right? The cost of an Indian girl that is of a dark skin being set up in a way where she will never be anything is too high a cost. That is one individual life. And until an individual life becomes something of worth to a nation, then is when change will happen. And we have to continue. We have to continue challenging the status quo and say, we're not dancing to this music anymore. We're not. We demand a new DJ. We demand a new playlist. We're not playing to the same beat and rhythm anymore. We want to do a world challenge. We want to do a whatever else. But we have to at some point say enough is enough. We're not dancing collectively. And then say we need change. And each and every one of us, each person say, I am not Black, I am not a woman, but because Black people and women are important to me, I'm gonna stand up and fight because their life is important. And that challenges your mindset to go from local to global. And so we only have 5 more minutes left. So I'm gonna ask each of you, if somebody was to watch the next 60 seconds where you talk, right? I mean, that's all they're gonna get. What would you want them to take away from everything we have spoken today? And I'm asking it again so you can be thinking, right? I'm giving you all time. 60 seconds. What is a takeaway message you would want somebody to take away from this and other conversations? And I will start with Nema.
Okay, so I would say 2 things. I would say to my white brothers and sisters, I would ask, please do not expect a Black person who is hurting, who their brothers and sisters are being killed and murdered on the street, who had to change their names to match English names so that they can get jobs, who had to rename their mountains so that they can be recognized by the Atlas, who Indigenous people who were discovered because a white person came and discovered them. Do not ask them to come to you to teach you something. It is good and it is right and it is loving to go to them and to ask them about their experience. And when they share it, thank them. That's what I would ask, because I personally, I am tired of having to explain why somebody has privilege, or trying to explain why I'm hurting, or what racism is, or how systemic injustice looks like. So that's what I would say. To my fellow Black brothers and sisters, I would call us to be patient and to, even in this time, to be loving also. And when that happens, to actually take the time to engage as much as you can. Give the space for people to make mistakes as long as they are engaging, and correct them with love. So just overall love and patience, and giving space to every single person. But it is good and right for the person who's not hurting to pour into the person who is hurting, and to reach in, rather than me, I'm hurting and I'm reaching out to you like, hey, please talk to me, help me, like, let's talk about this. Let me, like, that's not right. So those are the 2 things. Like, let's keep talking, but like, let's know the direction of the conversation and how it should, and how it's most helpful.
Okay. Claudia, what about you?
So it is exactly what Nema said, and I have to say I was a little bit nervous coming on the session here today, because I thought, what is there that I can contribute? What is there that I can say? As I said before, I have not experienced this pain. I don't know what it is like, and you just brought it so beautifully home. What I'm going to take away from this is to ask more questions, to reach out, to do it with love. Not only because I'm someone who is probably, without knowing, experienced a lot of white privilege in my life, but someone who has love for everyone. And if I have love for a friend, then I will raise my loving hand. And if I have love for my son, then I need to understand what this life that he's going to live is going to look like moving forward as well. So thank you so much for sharing this so openly and honestly, even though you're tired of it, because it really helps me to stay engaged and stay informed, and most importantly, hopefully continue to be inspired by this to turn the narrative around. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Nema encapsulated it so well. I will say that number 1, knowledge is power for everybody. For the white individuals in America, understanding your real, true history, understanding your privilege. And for Black people also is also understanding your history, understanding how privilege works, getting to know the system and why it doesn't work for you. I think kind of saves us the frustration of dealing with unfortunate situations. I would also like to say when you know more, you can do more. So think of solutions. You know, we talk a lot about the problems. Always think, well, what can I do about it now? And then number three, building a solution is not it's not 100% dependent on the person with privilege. It's also dependent on all of us, you know, just like Nema said, you can't expect, you know, someone to pour into you or to reach into you when you're the one that's hurting. We also have to be very vocal, and which I feel like Black people in America are doing that so well right now, very vocal. This is inappropriate. This has to change. Those are the things that, as Nema said before, really are the catalyst of change. And the last thing, just on more of a religious note, I think always remembering that we all belong to God, and God is the God of everybody, and everyone who's here on earth belongs to him, and everyone who is here on earth belongs here. The world belongs to all of us. So knowing that we matter, you're not small, even though a system may tell you that you're small, in no way are you small in the eyes of God. So I think that kind of helps for us to understand that even when we are wanting to have change, that love has to be inbred in that as well. So love one another, I guess, is my message. That kind of covers a multitude of sins.
Yes. Thank you. Wow. I love that. And to wrap this up, love thy neighbor as thyself. The way you would want to be treated, hey, treat the next person regardless of what they think, what they look like, how they talk. Love them as human beings because God is a God of everybody. Initiate conversations, bridge the divide, and start with a hello. Hey, hello, my name is Elizabeth. I know, you know, whoever you are, hello, my name is. How are you doing in this time? That's a great way to initiate a conversation, and then actively listen and purpose to do one thing. As we are challenging the systems to change, let us know that it starts with us, and we can do something that becomes a domino effect to impact everybody, even to the next generation that Claudia is showcasing here. Is the work we are doing is not even just for us. It's for the children that we are having, the children we will raise, and the children that will follow us. And let us make sure that they come to a world where skin color band-aids have been around for a while, where they come to a world where if they walk into a hospital and are seeking care, regardless of the color of their skin, they get it. When they go to a police officer, when they go to a teacher, they get respected as human beings. That is what these conversations are doing. And thank you so much for tuning in from wherever you are. Thank you, panelists, for doing a wonderful job and being vulnerable and allowing us to walk with you. And Claudia, thank you for co-hosting this with me, even though it is 2 a.m. there. And for you, our viewers, for informing this conversation. And we invite you to our next talk, which will be Tuesday right here, where we now focus strictly on solutions. Ivy said, we can talk about the problem, but even as we do, what are the solutions? What are the next steps? So that is our conversation. And until then, hey, start saying hello, keep that vibe authentic and on high, and allow other people to do so. Good night, God bless, and start those conversations.